Hi YouTube, it's been a while. I've been on a journey, a long, crazy, and infinitely humbling one. A journey which took me from going nowhere in life to moving from Scotland to England and then back to Scotland again, all in the pursuit of a dream. Leading me to experience more ups, downs, and crazy chaos than I ever expected from this journey to become a game developer. And at the end, there will be a little show and tell of some of the game projects I worked on throughout this journey. So let me fill you in on how it went. Picture it, it's 2020, the world is in lockdown. I was stuck in the four same walls, desperately trying to make the best of an increasingly dire situation. Reflecting on my past and my regrets, I felt like I hadn't achieved anything in my life. There were things to be proud of along the way for sure, but there was one thing that hung over me like a dark cloud. I'd always told myself that one day I would work in game development. I'd find someone who would work with me as my programmer and we'd make something great together. But that never happened. I've never been very good at putting myself out there socially and just didn't rub shoulders with those sorts of people pretty much ever. I ended up spending most of my 20s stuck just working odd jobs in retail, which I hated, and making a YouTube channel that didn't make much of a splash and generally just felt like I was disappointing everyone around me. And well,
I was sick of it. Enough of this, I said. I wasn't going to feel sorry for myself anymore. I wanted to be better. The past is in the past, and what mattered was what I did going forward. I was going to do it. I was going to fight to become a game developer. No more excuses, no matter what it takes. It was time to put in the work and get good. So, I did what anyone in this situation would do. I started to learn.
Now, a quick history. I wasn't going into game development completely blind. I went to college and university doing 3D animation and had done plenty of 2D animation in my time as well, so when it came to the art side of things, I had some serviceable, albeit rusty skills to help push me along. After all the time between initially leaving YouTube behind and when this whole journey began, I'd spent that time trying to improve myself physically and mentally and ended up not doing a whole lot of art, as well as moving houses. A lot. However, I had tried learning game development before by following YouTube tutorials and trying to learn code through a website called Code Academy before, but gave up for some reason. I remember thinking that I just was too stupid to learn to code, but it turns out that's just how all programmers feel. I recall the issue being that I was following YouTube tutorials and the smart people behind the screen were often like,
"Okay everyone, now type this code."
"Okay, done. What does it do?"
"And would you look at that? It's working."
"Yeah, it does. Awesome. But like, how does it work?"
"Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe."
But what does it do?" Sound familiar? Returning to around 2020, when I was having these thoughts of really working to achieve my goals of learning game development, I was very aware of my previous attempts at learning this discipline and the gaps in my knowledge that I needed to focus on. I could follow all the tutorials in the world and copy all the code off Google or YouTube that I wanted, but if I didn't understand what any of it was doing in the first place, then I wasn't going to get anywhere, and I wanted to be able to write my own code, not just steal other people's work. So if you find yourself in a situation like I was, here are the steps I followed to sort of brute force my way into learning coding and game development, and bear in mind, I am still learning to this day. They may not work for you, but they kind of worked for me. Step 1. Pick a game engine and focus all of your brainpower on learning that one game engine for the time being. Game dev and coding have plenty of transferable skills, and while each engine out there has its own quirks to learn, early on it works in your favor to just focus all your efforts in one place. For me, I chose to go with Unity because I dabbled with it in the past and vaguely remembered liking C# as a coding language. And I still don't regret this choice. Even with all that Unity runtime fee pricing drama a couple years ago, I never changed my mind on this, and to this day Unity is still my favourite game engine and preferred engine for game development. Outside of Unity, I had tried Unreal and found it to have some good tools, but for whatever reason, I just didn't find it as intuitive or enjoyable as Unity. And previously had messed with GameMaker, but I was in the mindset of I don't want to learn GML, which is GameMaker's own proprietary language, which I will quickly say is perfectly fine. I'm a lot more open to this concept these days. It's just that at the time I wanted to learn a more robust and quote-unquote real coding language, so in the end, Unity and C# won out as it aligned with all my goals and preferences I had at the time. Step 2. This step is a bit of a crazy one, so maybe not as easy to follow, but I wanted to surround as many areas of my life with game development and in as many ways as I could, effectively forcing me to always be thinking about game development. I went about this by first of all going to any social media I was using at the time, Twitter mostly, and following game developers and anything I felt was relative to gaining the knowledge I needed and achieving this goal. This included subscribing to a bunch of YouTube channels about learning game dev like Brackeys, CodeMonkey, DevDuck, Thomas Brush, Blackthorn Prod, to name a few, and so on. And lastly, I decided to go back to college to do a game development course. Now, depending on your circumstances, this may not be so easily achieved, but for me, I felt it would be beneficial. It would let me interact with more aspiring game developer types and help me by setting goals for me to achieve in the form of my coursework. Going into it, I didn't even care if the course turned out to be terrible. I was prepared to do whatever it took to get closer to my goal. Plus, thankfully, education in Scotland is cheap. Step 3. The last step was a simple one. Focus. I wanted to keep myself disciplined. Locked in, as the kids say. I wanted to make sure I took my college work seriously and even outside of it, always be experimenting with development while cultivating good habits. For me, a helpful habit has always been having a notebook close by for getting ideas out of my head and onto a physical page, simply for me to refer back to. You could achieve the same thing with a Word document or something for sure, but I just always preferred the process of writing it out with a pen and paper. Some people, myself included, find that by writing things out it helps you to absorb information better, since you need to think about each individual word as you're writing, making you go through the same information again. And that's pretty much all the main steps I took to get myself on the right path to learn. I think above all, to succeed in learning game development, or any new skill really, you need to have a decent thirst for learning, and game development, above all other mediums, requires wearing a lot of hats. You need to understand code, art, sound, and design. Obviously, if you get a job in the industry, then you'll be put into your own department with just one core discipline, but when it comes to working and learning solo, you're going to have to do everything yourself. This doesn't mean you need to be a master of every aspect. If you want to be an artist, focus on making interesting looking art and visuals. If you want to be a coder, then use assets and programmer art. And I'm sure you understand what I'm getting at. Learn as many areas as you can, but also don't stretch yourself too thin. I did college for 2 years, and at the end of those 2 years, I'd picked up some decent skills and knowledge, and then something incredibly unexpected happened. A few weeks before finishing college, I threw out a job application in the game industry. I think it literally was just one single application that I happened to come across, and they actually got back to me. In fact, they wanted an interview with me. I panicked. I think I literally screamed. I had never had an interview for a game studio, and I had tried in the past but got no responses ever. So I had an online interview over Zoom with 2 individuals from the company in question. I spoke about my work and experiences, and shortly after the interview, heard back from them. They wanted me to complete an art test, which is a very common practice in creative industries, but comes with its own set of controversies depending on who you ask. But at the time I was thrilled. I loved the idea of making something specific to try and appeal to them, and I was almost done with 2 years at college. I had everything to prove. I received an email with the specifications of the art test brief. It was just meant to be for the sake of the art. I could just make an animation and fake it. They even specified in the email that I could do that, but I wanted to make something actually playable. Why? Because I'm just insane like that. Or more specifically, I wanted a way to prove to myself that I had actually learned how to do this whole game development business, and I wasn't just lying to myself. So I got to it. And I don't know what happened to me, but for a week straight, I became the game dev avatar. I was on fire, writing code, creating art in a way I had never done before. After all, the stakes were high. This could make or break everything. This is the kind of opportunity I'd been working towards. 2 years after I set out on this journey to achieve my dream, and I felt like I couldn't take any chances. I started early and worked late, and in the end, I had this project to show for it all. So I recorded some game footage, wrote up an email, and sent my week's worth of game project to the mobile game studio, Quali. And my life changed.
I just had a conversation with that goose.
I was hired as a junior game artist at Quali. I was in disbelief. I was over the moon. I was moving to England.
Come on, England!
Leamington Spa, to be exact. This stipulation of moving so far from their home, leaving everything behind to chase their dream, might sound like a turn-off for some people, but at the time, I didn't care. I wasn't going to say no to an opportunity like this because I'd never gotten such a chance in my life. It wasn't easy, but I committed to moving to England to take this job, and thankfully, Quali had a nice relocation package to help make the move easier. And so began the most interesting 9 months of my life. Yeah, just 9 months. Working at Quali was amazing. Such an incredible learning experience that I cannot understate. I met some awesome people, some of whom I'm still friends with to this day. Not to mention, my boss was none other than the UK developer legend David Darling. I didn't speak to him much, but I would pass him in the hallway, which is just an insane situation to find yourself in. So I guess you could say I'm a pretty big deal now. I was in a photo due to our game doing so well. I'm the dude behind the cupcake, and at the end of the year Quali pub quiz, they asked who the poor soul obscured by the cupcake was. Yeah, it's your boy. It sounds awesome, right? So why did I quit? That's right, I chose to leave, of my own accord. The job was awesome. I loved so much about it. But that was kind of the issue. This is definitely a me problem, but I was just really lonely. The job was great, but outside of work, I was very isolated. As I said before, I've never been very good at putting myself out there socially. I'd left behind everything for this job. This included my girlfriend at the time and my 2 cats, Oolong and Sencha. And I mean, look at them. How could I stay apart from them, right? So I decided I'd return to my home in Scotland in February of 2023 and got a normal retail job and did game development in my free time. And let me tell you, that was a brutal return to earth. Going from working in a game studio, then going back to normal retail work, dealing with customers, it was like I traded everything for the complete opposite of what working at Quali was like. Instead of having a fulfilling job and no real home life, I was back in the city I loved, with the people I loved, and creating things I loved while working a job that kind of sucked, and I won't lie, I was weirdly happier for it. I know, surprising, right? And even better, something about my time at Quali really kickstarted something in me. I guess doing game development as my day job for that long instilled some good habits in me, so I'd gotten much better at committing myself to working in my free time on creative projects, but the journey isn't quite over. I would move home again, this time back to my hometown, which meant another new job in retail, which wasn't great, but it was during this time that I made some projects that I'm still incredibly proud of, and it's because of those projects that I got the job I have now. These days, I'm a 3D artist and developer for Paradigm Games. We're owned by Miniclip, which is pretty cool because I used to play Flash games on their website as a kid, so it's kind of wild working as part of a game company that I've known about for such a large portion of my life. We're a small team at Paradigm, there's literally only 4 of us, and I get to work entirely from home, and it's the most laid-back job. I sometimes feel like I'm unemployed or something because I literally wake up, make coffee, and sit at my desk doing game dev, just like I would always do on my days off when working retail, only now I'm getting paid for it. And that's the whole thing. That's my journey from start to finish. There were obviously some things in the past that slightly contributed that I might not have mentioned, like while attending university for 3D animation, I got my start with coding in Unity by using a website called Code Academy and dabbled in some personal projects during that time, but I lost my faith in my ability too quickly, and that sort of thing just happened a lot in the past. It was this nearly 5-year period that really changed everything for me. Just by deciding to stop making excuses and just put in the work to learn the skills I needed to make my own game projects, and in doing so got some insane opportunities and in the end gained an incredible career. So since you made it this far, I figured I would go over some of the game projects I dabbled with over this time and try to give some insight into the processes behind them. Also, I'm a bit of a serial project hopper, so please don't judge me. I know there's a lot, and to be clear, none of these are finished or released. If you like the look of any project in particular, you can be sure to tell me that I'm a lazy bitch in the comments, and I'll maybe pick up working on one of these again. So here's my notable projects in a roughly chronological order. My first attempt at a project after leaving Quali was this little game titled Mort. I had envisioned it something like The Binding of Isaac, only in 3D, where you play as this little glowy skeleton dude, appropriately called Mort, which is like, I don't know, Latin for death or something. I don't know, it's meant to be clever. There was also a female character I drew up called Morticia, which is significantly less clever. During this time, I went all in on planning. I made a GDD, or game design document if you want to be formal. I also drew up a bunch of key art and concept art, so you could tell I was taking my new indie dev status quite seriously, but during this project, I simply wasn't as good a programmer, due in part to me having just spent the last year or so at Quali doing only art. No programming whatsoever, so I was a bit rusty. To get around this, I tried using Top-Down Engine by the developer More Mountains, which is an amazing asset. You can grab off the Unity asset store, and it's an incredibly well thought out resource that uses Unity's event system. And it essentially makes creating a top-down shooter game in Unity a mostly drag and drop process. I don't know how viable it would be for big complex projects, but for something on the small side like I had in mind, I think it would have been fine. I created Mort's 3D model and got him rigged and moving around in Unity with some cute animations, including a nice flowy cape achieved using another asset called Magica Cloth 2, which is super satisfying and easy to use. I set up some nice weapons and an atmospheric environment to help pin down the vibe. It felt pretty nice to play and had some good ideas. I just felt a bit over my head with this one at the time. The idea was to have randomly generated rooms, but I couldn't get it to work on a fundamental programming level at the time, as I felt it was just a bit too complex for where I was skill-wise, so I ended up shelving it. However, I'm still really proud of this project, despite its current incomplete status. I think the ideas were cool, the visuals were interesting, and it was the first time I'd ever made something that somewhat resembled a game on my own, and it's honestly a project I would love to return to at some point, since I think I'm actually fairly well equipped to implement all the features I'd want now. Next up is a little mobile game I worked on for a while called Flick Switch. It was a very simple idea. You played as a little cube and you could move in 4 directions, up, down, left and right. Once you move, you were locked into your movement choice until you hit something and came to a stop. And it was with these simple controls you'd make your way through handcrafted, puzzle-esque levels and reach the goal. Pressing switches, opening doors, using the doors in clever ways, collecting color-coded keys for matching sliding doors, and using the level's geometry to line yourself up to be in the right place to make use of your limited movement options. I think this game had some neat ideas. I did go decently far into development with this one. What killed this one was just a lack of faith in the idea. I wasn't sure if I could do enough to keep things feeling fresh as the levels went on. A friend pointed out to me that this project also kind of resembled Tomb of the Mask in terms of its controls, which was a great place to draw inspiration from, but it did shake my confidence a bit that I was possibly stealing ideas, because although I had not heard of it prior to my friend mentioning it, It did look familiar visually, so it's possible I had seen it in passing. I felt my idea was different enough to have its own identity at least. For one, it was in 3D and was slower paced and going for more of a puzzle kind of gameplay loop. My favourite aspect of Flick Switch was definitely the visual style. I went for a sort of Aztec or Mayan vibe mixed with a glowy Breath of the Wild inspired retro futuristic tech element. I only made a couple full test levels, one of which has pretty much all the art and intended puzzles in place, so here's a full run through of that level to give you an idea. I recall wanting to slowly introduce the player to the mechanics by having levels which focus on a specific element to teach the player, and the levels then getting progressively more complex. I still look at this project with pride and slightly kick myself for not finishing it. It was when I gave up on Flick Switch that I actually stopped working on trying to make a commercially viable game for a while. Not that I didn't want to release something, but with Mort and Flick Switch, I recall encountering a couple coding hurdles that I just struggled with, and I simply decided instead to focus on experimentation, making a few random prototypes through YouTube tutorials or just dabbling, so here's a few quick-fire ones. There was a nice platformer which I'd messed around with, trying to get to grips with a potential 2D grappling hook and wall jumping. A Suika game knockoff, but for fun I made it with Pokeballs, and it's honestly just as fun as the original, but for obvious reasons I couldn't even consider releasing this one, although I have been tempted to make a build for my phone so I could play it on the go, since it is touch control enabled and works pretty well. Various little game jam projects, and eventually I worked on a car game which I will go in depth with because this one turned out to be important. So my little untitled car game project, those of you who maybe watched my YouTube channel back when I made video game reviews, PS, you can still watch those old videos by going to my playlists. I've simply unlisted them for a bit of spring cleaning since I'm going in a new direction. You might remember a little game series called Chorikyu. Chorikyu games kind of became part of my channel's identity. I was the dude who reviewed Chorikyu, and people enjoyed them, and I found them fascinating, so it was win-win. And I remember there was a Chorikyu Discord where one of the moderators always talked about making their own Chorikyu game. I remember thinking maybe I could do that, so I started messing around with wheel colliders in Unity, which are Unity's built-in solution that tries to mimic the way cars work in real life, using things like wheel torque and a car's center of gravity to control how it moves and drifts. And while it can be janky at times, it's a decent tool set once you've figured out its quirks. So I set to making a little physicsy Chorikyu style prototype. I never intended to go very far with it, but I did have fun making it, and the end result does look pretty satisfying and the physics work pretty decent. The reason this is important is because I'm pretty sure this is part of the reason I got the job at Paradigm, as we deal with wheel colliders a lot in our games. So if there's a lesson to be learned here, it's that it's good to experiment with game ideas and the different tools found in your game engine of choice. So after experimenting for the better part of a year or so, and my life going through an exhausting amount of changes, as is typically the case for me, I decided I should try to actually release something. And I know what you're thinking, but Scott, you said you didn't release any of these, and to that I say... So Cloud Hop Drop. This was my attempt at making an infinite scrolling Flappy Bird-esque game, but my way of doing these sorts of games inspired by something else is I really try to put my own spin on it. Typically I'm not content to just copy something exactly unless it's a case like my Pokeball Suika game, where I just wanted to understand what was going on under the hood in a game like that. So Cloud Hop Drop has you playing as a little bunny dude named Momo, jumping on clouds and collecting coins. This game very nearly got finished. It technically has a full gameplay loop, but I always felt like it was lacking something. The thing was obviously character customization. This feature was a bit of a headache to produce, but I did get it working, so theoretically, all I'd need to do to release this game is make a bunch of hats and customization options you can buy with the coins and implement ads in a reasonable way, unlike most mobile games which give you 3 seconds of gameplay for 2 minutes of ads. I'm totally not bitter about the hyper-casual game market on mobile. This game was super fun to work on, carving out a cute, soft art style, very much Kirby inspired. I weirdly enjoy working on UI elements in Unity. Well, I enjoy drawing them and getting the buttons working, but shit like layout groups and making the UI scale with various screen sizes is a bit of a technical nightmare half the time. I can do it, I just don't want to. But yeah, I keep vaguely coming back to this project and chipping away at it, so maybe I'll release it someday. I'd love to see it on the App Store somewhere because I think it's fun. When working on it, I do tend to get lost just playing it. Now we come to the real meat and potatoes, a little project called Bang Bang. And where did this game start? The best place for all indie games to start, a game jam. There's a series of game jams that take place via H.io called Microjam, hosted by BenZAMG. The theme was Renaissance, and I kind of forget how this game tied into that theme, but this was the first project I had ever actually managed to submit for a game jam, and the version you can find on H.io is pretty terrible, don't play it. But after the jam had finished, I kept working on it, and now it feels pretty nice to play. Although I started refactoring my code to make it into a state machine rather than just one big long script for the movement, so its current state is a bit weird, but I'm still happy with this project. I was very inspired by Wario Land-like games at the time, such as Pizza Tower and Anton Blast, and leaned into that wackiness with the animation and tone of things, with being able to run fast, jump off walls. It had some nice quality of life features like jump buffering and coyote time. It was my first time implementing 2D lighting with real-time shadows as well, so I'm still super pleased with how this project looks. The main gameplay concept behind it was you have a shotgun which has a ton of recoil, and you can use it to shoot yourself all around the level. I even implemented a feature like the high speed mode from Sonic Advance 2. The thing that I struggled with the most with this project though was having my character walk up and down sloped surfaces. It was a headache trying to get the script to do what I wanted. I was essentially just making a platformer and throwing random mechanics at the wall. Again, I struggled to find out a good gameplay loop that worked for this. I had implemented a bunch of strange mechanics, and despite looking really cool and juicy and full of character, I just didn't really know what to do with it, so I shelved it. I probably won't come back to this concept specifically, but I'd still love to use the character in a platformer, and if I did make a similar game concept, I'd go into it with the idea of sloped surfaces being a big part of it and build the movement code initially with that stuff in mind. Now for the last project I worked on before I started my job at Paradigm, which obviously now takes up the majority of my time. I went back to my desire to make a roguelike in the style of Binding of Isaac, but with the concept being to make it heavy metal themed. And when I say heavy metal, I sort of mean like how Brutal Legend has a metal aesthetic. I kind of want to do something similar. Currently, the project's tentative title is Into the Pit, but I've also been referring to it as Reverb. The gameplay so far is pretty straightforward as I was still experimenting. This time, however, I did get the random dungeon generation working quite nicely. I got basic treasure chests which contain items that change your basic attack, as well as implementing a basic dash mechanic and a simple enemy. The standout thing about this project, I think, is the art. I went for a more stylized, almost a vector art style for the character instead of pixel art, and on top of that, I created a 2D rig for Reverb, which yielded some really smooth looking animation. I still want to work more on this project, but in its current state, it feels far too much like a blatant rip-off of The Binding of Isaac, which I'd really like to try and change to make it something more unique instead. I definitely enjoyed the artistic process for this one since I'm a big fan of metal music, and the vibe I was going for was based on the album cover for Apex by Unleash the Archers, which, by the way, is an incredible album which you should definitely give a try. And that's pretty much it. Other than those, I was recently dabbling with a card game since I got really into Balatro and how satisfying fiddling with the cards and that could be, but my priority these days is obviously my job at Paradigm Games. Currently, I'm working on a new feature for our game City Smash 2, which is free on mobile if you want to play something I've worked on. The most recent update includes a ton of stuff I worked on, and I'm super proud of it, but in my spare time, I still make time for my own projects, including restarting this YouTube channel.
hope you enjoyed this little insight into my journey towards becoming a game developer, and the projects which helped mold my abilities into what they are now. I'm always pushing to learn more and constantly feel like I'm improving, with my job helping greatly in that aspect. As I'm not just an artist these days, I also do coding at Paradigm, so I'm able to continue brushing up all areas of my skills. Also, real quick, I want to let you know that one of our big games, Solar Smash, has recently been added to YouTube Playables, so you can play our game directly on YouTube. I'll leave a link to it in the description. Give it a go and have fun destroying stuff. As for the future of the channel going forward, I'm hoping to continue making videos about game dev, as well as games in general, as it's a topic I'm obviously very passionate about. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the stuff I might not have touched on, or things in this video I might not have gone deep enough into. Lastly, if you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video and consider subscribing for more like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.